G'day everyone, my name's Barney. Today we'll be making a click and drag mechanism inside P5js, so let's get started. The first thing we're going to do is to actually just get some random points on the screen, and we'll deal with the dragging in a little bit, but first let's get these points on the screen. So I've just got an empty array called points, which will hold all of our points, and then I've also got a drag point, and we'll use this a bit later to keep track of which point we've actually clicked on and are dragging at any given time. We'll also say how many points we want, and in this case I've just set it to 5, and also a drag radius, and so this is how close you have to be to the center of this point to actually be able to click on it and drag it. Again, we'll use this in a little bit. Now in the setup, what I've done is I've increased the stroke weight so we can hopefully see the outlines of these points a little better. I've also got a for loop that's going between 0 and the number of points that we've defined, and for each of them we're pushing a random vector into our points array. So we're just passing into this create vector function a random value between 0 and the width, and for the y we're passing in random between 0 and the height, and we're just putting that vector into our points array. Then inside the draw function, we're going to set the fill color to be a red, and then we go over each of the points that we've just generated, and for all of them, we just draw a circle at its X and Y location, and we give it a diameter that's equal to the drag radius times 2. And when we run this, you can see we get our random red points just showing up on the screen, which is great, but as you can see, we can't click and drag them. And I would like to note at this point that obviously you're probably not going to want to be dragging just red circles around the screen, but if you've got anything with an X and Y location that you've got in an array, this technique will still actually work for you, so don't worry. So in order for this click and drag technique to work, what we need to do is be able to detect if our mouse location is inside one of our circles here. And the way we're going to do that is to create this mouse in circle function, which does exactly what it sounds like. So we pass in the position of one of our circles and the radius of the circle, and then we just check to see if the distance between the mouse and the center of the circle is less than the radius. And if it is, it means that the mouse location is inside that circle. Otherwise, obviously, we're just returning false, and so we know that the mouse isn't inside our circle. Another thing to note here is obviously we're using a circle to check whether our mouse is in the right location, and your object that you want to drag around might not be a circle. And so if that's the case, you might have to do some more advanced collision detection. I'm just using a circle because it's pretty straightforward, as you can see, and also it'll get you out of trouble for a lot of use cases. But if you'd like to see some more advanced collision detection shapes and all of that, let me know in the comments and we'll get to it in a future video. But moving on from that, now that we've got our mouse in circle function, we can now check to see when we click our mouse if our mouse is actually in one of our circles and initiate the drag. So the way we're going to do that is we're going to use the mouse pressed function, and inside it we're going to loop through the points backwards through the array. And the reason we go through it backwards is because when we're drawing them, you can think of the things at the start of the array as being on the bottom, and as we draw, we're getting further and further into the array, so the things at the end of the array are on top. What we want to do is when we're checking for collision, go backwards through the array so that we're checking from the top down. So anything that was drawn last will actually be clicked on first. So now that we've got our points and we're going through the array in the right direction, we can now check if our mouse is within that given point that we're up to. And so to do that, we obviously use our mouse in circle function, and we pass in the point that we're up to and the drag radius. And if the mouse is inside that location, then what we want to do is we want to bring that point that we've just clicked on to the end of the array. So anything we click on gets brought to the top as we draw. And we also want to store that point into our drag point so we know which point we're dragging. And so the way we do this is we use the splice function at the I location to remove that point from our points array and store it in the drag point. We then update its X and Y location to the mouse X and Y, and then what we do is we push that drag point back into the points array so that it's at the end, which is essentially bringing it all the way to the top. Next, we've got the mouse dragged function, and this gets called whenever we've got the mouse button held down and we're moving the mouse around the screen. And as you can imagine, what we want to do is if we've got a drag point assigned, then we want to update its X and Y location to be where the mouse has been dragged, so the mouse X and the mouse Y. And then to finish off the whole mouse drag life cycle, we've got the mouse released function, and this obviously gets called when we release the mouse button, and we want to set the drag point back to null so that once we've stopped clicking the mouse button, we stop dragging as well. And with just this little bit of code, you can see we've now got click and drag implemented in P5js. And like I was saying, This doesn't have to apply to only red circles. It can apply to a whole range of things, anything with an X and Y location. I'd also like to quickly demonstrate that going through the array backwards and doing all that bringing the point to the top thing wasn't all for nothing. So if I click any of these points here, you can see that it goes over the top of all of the other points. But then if I click a different point, it's now on top of all of those points as well. So any point that I click on gets brought to the top. Now this technique's great because it's so simple and it'll cover most of the use cases you have for click and drag. And as you can see, even if I bump up the number of points we've got from 5 to 500, it's still running really smoothly. And granted, your application for click and drag probably isn't doing only click and drag, so it's probably not the fairest representation, but as you can see, it's not really a bottleneck having 500 points that we're clicking and dragging. However, going through all of the points that we've got to find which one we've clicked on isn't the most efficient way to do it, and there's more efficient ways. For example, a quad tree is a great way of figuring out which points you've clicked on without having to loop through the whole array. So if you'd like to see that, let me know in the comments, and hopefully if you are running into troubles with this being too slow for you, the quad tree will solve it. But let me know if you'd like to see that in the future. Well, there we are. We've got click and drag implemented in P5js. It's simple but effective, and hopefully it helps you in whatever your project that you're currently working on is. If you found this video useful, it would be great if you could let me know by clicking the like button, and I'll see you next time.